Welcome to the show, Mr. Mike Nicoll. What's new?
Dan, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it and excited to get into it with you, man. A lot to talk about.
Yeah, I know, man. Like we were chatting earlier. I'm 48 years old, and I grew up in an era that if you wanted to learn about high school hoops, you have to buy the Street and Smith College Preview, and in the back they'd have a couple pages of high school, top 50 and where they might go, and that's how I found out about guys like, Kenny Anderson, a slick point guard out of New York, or Alonzo Mourning, or all these guys. And now it's a massive, massive business, and you cover a lot of that in your new film.
So, yeah, man. I mean, like you're really driving at like one of the core themes of our film. Which, by the way, The Spoils: Selling the Future of American Basketball. You guys can check it out on thespoilsmovie.com. We're streaming with an amazing partner called Jolt. So go to jolt.film or thespoilsmovie.com and you can check it out. But I mean, right off the top, Dan, you just hit on it. I mean, I think the biggest reason I made this film was to really lay bare how over the last, we shot the film for over an 11-year period of time. And I would contend that that is the most transformational stretch of time in the history of the American basketball domain.
Yes.
And where the rubber meets the road on why that matters. And I think that there are manifestations of it at every level of the game. But our core idea is that the infrastructure and the machine that's been built up around American basketball has made the business itself the game.
Correct.
And when we talk about, or when our film, one of the things I'm really most interested in is how every level of the system has been professionalized.
Yeah.
And like what you're talking about, you look at even just, and again, there's so much territory that our movie covers, and I want to get into all of it with you. But even just look to your point, when you look at, say, just as an example, the media apparatus that has grown up and exploded around what people would call grassroots or AAU basketball speaks to the level of interest that the fan base has in the next generation of stars. I mean, I talk about it like the ballless lifeification of this world, but like Kenny Anderson, 30, 40 years ago, like he's getting seen, platformed, and visible, the modern day version at 10 years old,
Yeah,
right? And so there
absolutely.
are so many upstream effects. And, again, going back to our core themes, I would say that every single thing that you see about the modern day NBA is informed by the incentives that are established on the grassroots level. And that's why I designed the film, our film, the way that I did, because I intended and built the film to be an origin story for modern
Yeah.
day NBA culture. And I think that's one of the many reasons it's pretty singular and special. And I really encourage everybody out there to go check it out.
Yeah, man, it's great. I mean, that you went on this 11-year journey. I'm assuming you're a hoops junkie, right? Because the only
My whole
guy that
life,
would go on on an
my whole
11-year
life.
journey through AAU stuff is somebody who just loves basketball.
For sure. I've spent my entire life traveling through the American basketball system.
Yeah.
And I really believe that a more nuanced and fulfilling understanding of like the end product has to be grounded in a grappling with how interconnected the levels are, right?
Yeah.
One thing about what, I think most people, I mean, we can get into like how much of the actual main product is even being consumed these days when you talk
Mhm.
about like social media content,
Yeah.
clips, highlights, etc. But, I think that there's an interconnectivity that I don't really think a lot of average fans quite understand. And, the reality is, AAU basketball is the system that we use in America to filter out who matriculates up. I always call it like the escalator to the NBA. And it
Yeah.
is this mandatory space. And, I like to say that like any basketball player, forget AAU basketball, but like any basketball player is going to carry with them the habits and the approach and the philosophy that they've spent the most time doing. So when you talk
Yeah.
about the NBA product and why I believe that like AAU ethos trickles up to the NBA, it's because the guys that are ultimately arriving have spent a decade of their lives sort of incubating in this culture. And then maybe they take a 1-year apprenticeship or sabbatical at a one and done, or they go to Australia or the G League or whatever, but they're arriving at 19 or so in the
Yeah.
NBA with a decade of really baked in ideas about what the game should be, how it should be played, what they're in it for. And I think that there are like really broad impacts of the AAU basketball legacy on the state and health of the current game. But I mean, we could talk about it. I've been, getting interviewed a lot since the film came out, and like a big conversation is like, we don't even necessarily produce the best basketball players anymore. I mean, the last
I
five
know, man.
MVPs are all international guys. You look at the all NBA teams, you look at, just again, I could point to the manifestations of this in any corner of the world. But again, this is why I made the film, because I think that there's a lot more going on in this world than most people understand.
100% because so the AAU system is a farm system for the NBA, and you recently read, I think it was Phil Jackson who said, look, the reason why a lot of the, and I'm paraphrasing, the Euro guys have stepped up is like they've really learned how to play the game, whereas this AAU culture is like their branding, it's a little bit more individualized. They're getting these kids, they're identifying by the time they're 11 years old, look, this kid's going to be a baller, right? And kind of just like developing them as just sort of like these individual players versus a team, and even to coach them down the road, it's we may be falling behind here as a country in hoops, correct?
Well, you think you hit on the key word to me. I think that one of the lasting legacies of AAU has been the way that it has individualized a team game,
Right.
and a beautiful team game. And one of the concerns, and sometimes I feel like a little bit of a traditionalist or purist talking about this, especially in this modern era
Yeah.
where the pendulum has now swung. And like, look, before we get into this, I want to say, of course, the value lives inside the players, right? So
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the financial windfall is long overdue.
Yes. Agreed.
And so there's no disputing that. I do think, though, that there's a balance that is in the best interest of every stakeholder here that we have not achieved, both from a player and family level, from a game level. But, on the deepest level, I do have, I like I said, I spent my entire life in this world as a
Yeah.
kid playing AAU, then as a young man in high school and college playing, and then as a filmmaker in this world for over 10 years. I think that there needs to be a more honest and level and balanced conversation about what we're encouraging the priorities to be for this generation of American players, because having spent a decade in these gyms, in this culture, I'm seeing a decade now, I'm seeing now multiple generations of American players identifying, like you said, brand building, social media following,
Yeah.
NIL deals, visibility, all of these things that at the end of the day are not the main thing.
Right.
And I'm a big believer in the idea that there can only be one main thing. And so as this infrastructure continues to explode and these kids' priorities and time and focus gets dragged in these other directions, the basketball itself gets moved further and further away from the center. And I think
Yeah.
that's what you see really at every level. And when I say the business has become the game, so much about what goes into matriculating has less and less to do with what's on the floor. And, we could even the competitive nature of the way we do it. I mean, like, there's a lot to say. So,
Yeah. So, okay. So walk me through the underbelly of AAU, right? Like you've got all these handlers, and one character I want to talk about from the movie is, I think it's pronounced Etope, the head coach
Ato.
that you walk
Yeah,
through.
Ato.
Atope. So, he's the head coach, and there's a lot like him, right? That they identify players, they get the sponsorship from the shoe companies. Walk me through the underbelly of the financing. So the financing comes from the shoe firms, right?
Well, in on the most basic level, yes. And it's really funny too. Like when people say AAU basketball, they're actually referring to a commercial privatized subculture that has actually no affiliation with the actual AAU. The AAU is an organization in Florida, actually near you,
Uh,
called the Amateur Athletic Union. And
and nothing
back in
amateur about it.
well, actually, to their credit, I almost feel bad for them because their name's been dragged into this space that they don't participate in. It's kind of like
Uh,
the way people kind of like from a branding standpoint, when you say Kleenex, it's
yeah.
synonymous with, tissues, but it's, you know what I mean? It's like that,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
I get it. Yeah.
So, but going back to like why it's been able to mutate into what it's become, and you know your question about the funding and the underbelly, you know, it exists in this leadership vacuum.
Yeah.
And you know, I think I was talking a little bit at the beginning about how interconnected the world is,
Hmm.
but that is definitely very true. But at the base level, it is, you know, people use the word the phrase wild wild west a lot, but you know there is no leadership, there is no governing body, it is a completely unregulated space. And so what that allows for, if you're talking about like from the business, you know,
Yeah.
I would say I like to describe what, you know, the dynamic that makes this world go around really at every level is what I call juice proximity.
Okay.
So, you know, the players again, that's where the talent lives. That's
Yeah.
where the value is. And so what happens in this like totally like this huge vacuum is, you know, the creation of this relationship building space where all of these corporations, brands, adults are there to attach themselves to the talent.
Yeah.
You know, the rub is that the talent happens to be a 10 or 11-year-old kid,
It's
right?
it's it's crazy.
So and you know we talk about it in the film. There are a lot, you know, we talk to collectives, agents, insiders, executives, and they make the point, and I think it's absolutely true. A player can be understood to be a professional the moment that they begin presenting value to a brand or a company.
Yeah,
And I
and it's
think
getting
what
younger and younger. Like I remember when you know when the NIL and the this, you know, went to the Supreme Court and all this kind of stuff.
yeah
And I remember one of the big debates was, you know, they're all Zion Williams benefited so much from going to Duke. I go, Zion Williams had more followers as a
Mhm.
junior in high school on all of his social media platforms than the programs of Duke and Kentucky combined. So I
yeah,
question who's the one that brought the value, right?
that's a
And it's crazy. And
fantastic
so now you
question.
got, yeah, and you got the kid in the movie, the Mikey Williams kid,
Mhm.
who, you know, millions of IG and TikTok followers, and the kid was like 15. It's wild.
So going back to that again, it's this relationship building space. And when you think about, you know, Wozni Lambre from the Ringers talks about this in the film, but like, you know, in this business, everybody talks about in the media, etc. Like these players at every age are referred to as assets, as
Crazy,
commodities, right?
crazy.
And like and when they have the potential to ultimately be worth tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, of course there's a race to get in on the ground floor of that. And
Yeah,
again, going back to like the underbelly, those relationships, you know, whether you're an agent, whether you're a college recruiter, whatever stake you have in the game, where you're ultimately going to want to be shaping the opinions and mindset of these kids whenever they are old enough to do something that's going to help the company or the brand. Of course, the longer that the relationship has been there, the more likely they are to listen, the more, you know, so it's like
yeah.
it's all, again, that's why I call it juice proximity, because whatever your payoff is for being attached to this child, the earlier you can get in, the better chance you have of going along for the ride, right?
Yeah,
And so
what one of the things I loved about your movie is going in 11 years, and then you obviously you just hit the surface of it because the NIL just passed, you know, in the last couple of years. You know, you had those years where it's just like under the table black market of money being shuffled around, right? And you talk about it with the FBI investigation. But now it's in the wide open and it's just millions of dollars trading hands, very young kids. And it's like, yeah, I got sponsored by X company and they're paying me X dollars and you know, it's pretty wild.
so when I talk about the balance of that, I mean, you know, it's odd, right? Because there's the personal side of this conversation and then there's the like cultural side of the conversation. So I
Yeah,
think if you ask the average basketball fan or the average person about what they think about how the game is transformed and evolved. They'll say it's some combination of it's long overdue, the players deserve it, get the bag, get the
sure.
money, etc.
Yeah,
Right? You migrate that conversation to okay, well, it's your son who's 10 or who's 11.
yeah,
Instantly, there's a different consideration, right?
yeah,
And the question is ultimately, where and how do we want the money and childhood to collide?
right.
Because I would say, you know, going back to, you know, the ethos that gets trickled up when we are facilitating a culture and a system, and a set of incentives that is now encouraging these young players to, again, identify these other things as just as important, if not more important, than their relationships to the game, how they fit into a team. I would say, again, pulling out 30,000 feet, I think that one of the most important lessons a human being can learn in life is that this shit's not about you, right?
Right. Exactly. Right.
And when we talk about how this culture has individualized this team game, it's all about, like, you hear about, whether you see it in the transfer rates in college, but that starts again on the team hopping in
AAU.
AAU, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna go where I get the best look, where I get the most minutes, when I get the most,
Yeah.
whatever exposure. There's a lot of short-term goal setting that I think comes at
Yeah.
the expense of the longer-term trajectory of these kids' lives. And then again, when you pull back, it's like, we're not even necessarily producing the best basketball product anymore. So at the end of the day, I would say American basketball as a system is in a treacherous place long term, because there's just this momentum and inertia around the direction it's heading that, again, is prioritizing things that are not what I would call the main thing. So
Great. So let me ask you, one of the things I think about, how much does a AAU team get in funding? So like the Compton Orlando team, I'm sorry, the Compton Magic team that you followed, like
mhm.
what do they get in funding? Because they're traveling, they're housing kids, and then what does an AAU coach get paid?
Well, I certainly don't want to speak for Tope.
Sure, a
And
ballpark.
yeah. So, like, I wouldn't climb into his pocketbook quite like that. But what I'll say is, you know, we talk about this in the film. That juice proximity really fuels every participant in the system.
Mhm.
So when we say that the shoe companies are bankrolling the system, that whom they choose to sponsor is, of course, a direct one-to-one correlation with the caliber of player that team is able
Sure.
to put their arms around, right?
Yeah.
Because, as we say in the film, it's no different than Coke and Pepsi. It's no different than any other Apple and
Yeah.
Microsoft. you know uh their their relevance is based on the caliber of the talent that they have underneath their umbrella.
Mhm.
And so they want to get the best players wearing their shit.
Yeah.
And I think what the shoe companies have always been really savvy about understanding, and this is something that I think doesn't get talked about enough, is going back to the explosion of interest in this world. What the shoe companies understand is that these 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids are extraordinarily powerful salesmen within their
Mhm.
own communities. So when we grew
100%.
up, I looked at, like, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, like, I want to be like that. But
Yeah.
if I'm being honest, the best player at my school, or in my on my team, on my AAU team, in my community,
Mhm.
I actually wanted to be like, I have more one-to-one interfacing with that person. So I wanted,
Correct.
these kids want to be like the best players in their immediate circle, just as
Yeah.
much, if not more, than what they see on television. And so when
Yeah.
these shoe companies are able to, like, swag out these kids, send them to school with the newest this, that, and the other,
Yeah.
that is, grassroots marketing on a really fundamental level. And I don't think that can be underestimated. But yes, so, like, from an operating budget standpoint, the best teams definitely have, six-figure sponsorships that pay for their travel, pay for their lodging, pay for their gear, pay for their, a lot of things. And then there's, like, all of the other ancillary
Yeah,
ways
all the
that
handlers get a piece. Like,
all of
everyone
the
has
other ancillary
their hands in
ways
the pie.
that yes, like, again, it's the closer you are to the asset, the more able you are to leverage it to your benefit. And that's true everywhere. Again, the question is just, when it's starting at 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
you know I don't want to go on too long, and I'll cut it here, but what I'll say is, over the 11 years we shot this film, obviously there were things that used to be illegal, that people went to prison for, that are now illegal, that are
Right.
totally
Yeah.
broad daylight kosher, right?
It's crazy.
You would think that on the other side of that, people would be more willing to talk about this stuff. And one of
Mhm.
the things I'm most proud of with this film is the access we have. I don't think there's ever been a film that's been able to get as deep into this world as we do. You
Yeah.
would think on the other side of the legalization of this that there would be a more of a freedom to talk about this openly,
Yeah.
but there is still a lot of reluctance. And I think the reason is because there's still this like core soulful recognition of the baseline operating principle of that juice proximity, right? Like these these adults and companies can shroud it in whatever they would like to shroud it in, but at the
Yeah.
end of the day, your business is based on cozying up to talent as early as possible.
Oh,
And
100%. And it's a system that's been embedded in that world for so many years. What also has always blown my mind is that whether it was the FBI investigation, all these guys that get busted, none of the coaches got in trouble, and the coaches are as neck deep in this crap as anybody else. And it's always been the biggest hypocrites are the coaches who have made a ton of cash but then wouldn't let kids transfer. They'd lock them in. They would speak poorly of them. That's one of the things I'm very excited about for the kids. They need to get their piece of the pie, but it sort of puts these coaches on check now. Like, you don't control me, dude. Like, I kind of control you.
I think, again, going back to, I think that the spoils is in many ways sort of like ultimate testimony on the player empowerment era,
100%.
right? And, I think the biggest value proposition for our film, Dan, there are like literally hundreds of thousands of families who enter this system every year and will
Yeah.
go and will spend between 6 and 10 years traveling through it. Being in these gyms, talking to these families, being embedded in these conversations, what I hear a lot is from, parents on the other side muttering to themselves some version of, I wish I knew then what I know now.
Wow.
And I think that one of the highest goals I have for our film is that it can be this navigational blueprint for families who don't really have a clue on how to swim in the deep end of this pool.
Mhm.
And I think that I have you know I care so deeply about the game, and I want this film to be as useful and helpful to our audience as possible. But I think it's on some levels delusionary to think that these giant corporations, whether it's the NCAA, whether it's the shoe companies, whether it's all of the Fortune 500 stakeholders that have a claim on how this world gets shaped. I think any real change has to start at the family level
Yeah.
with a really honest education about, like, I always say, you're never going to hit a target you're not aiming at, but you better be really honest with yourself and intentional about what that target's going to be. And I
Yeah.
think that's where our film can
100%.
kind of step into it, because the better your kid is, the more directions he's going to get pulled into. And if you aren't really savvy about, understanding how all that works, you wake up one day, you look around, and you're so far afield from where you want to be. Even
Well,
if,
and it's gonna mess up the kid. I mean, and the big plan, not everyone's gonna go to the NBA. You should be very happy if you got a D1 scholarship, and with NIL money, maybe you walk away from the game with lots of, good head start, but
sure, but
you gotta be honest with
let's even
yourself.
stick on, let's double click on that scholarship idea.
Right.
So families will say, I want to get a free education. Cool. I'm not here to shit on that goal. However, look at the transfer rates. I can't tell
Oh,
you,
yeah,
even on
it's not about education, yeah,
but even if it is, right?
yeah,
Like, even the best programs. So let's take the Compton Magic, for example.
yeah,
So, they are a pipeline to the biggest, schools in the country, right?
yeah,
But a scholarship at the wrong place for you
mhm,
is not ultimately in your best interest, right? So, like, how many times do
yeah,
you see kids commit to a place, and they may never admit this out loud to themselves or to the world, but it's like you get to post that on IG and on Twitter that, like, 100% committed with the UCLA
yeah, yeah,
logo
yeah,
or the
the
university
hat on,
logo,
yeah,
and then you get there and it wasn't the right fit, is the point I'm
right,
making, and then
yeah,
you're back to square one trying to figure out what's best, so it's like that. But that decision is informed by a lot of, like, by 50 smaller decisions that prelude that led up to that. And
sure,
that's what I'm saying, where it's like, you gotta have your wits about you, because all money's not good money. Every scholarship's not a good scholarship. And I
Yeah.
know that that may sound like it's coming from a privileged position, but I actually reject that,
Mhm.
because if you do have a really solid foundation in the fact that, like, I am the one providing the value, you can operate from less of a place of desperation along the way,
Yeah.
and not be
Totally.
so desperate in seeking the next best opportunity, and and lower your time preference and take a longer term view, because this is a marathon, and to look at it
Yeah.
as a sprint, I think, is missing the broader picture.
So was there something that you would have loved to have added to the documentary, right? So you got to edit it. You probably got thousands of hours of film, but like maybe one piece or something that you couldn't put in because of X, Y, Z. Is there something that, man, you'd add a little flavor in some area?
That is a great question. Um, Let me think about that actually. Um, I have to say I'm so thankful to have been able to make this movie, because it is exactly what I wanted to make, and that's a really
Yeah.
rare thing, right? Like, any filmmaker will tell you that migrating the vision in your head or your soul out of your body and up onto the screen is a miracle in itself, right? And then
Sure.
for the final product to have the fidelity to the vision isn't
Mhm.
just another gigantic hurdle, you know. So I will say that this is exactly the story I wanted to tell, which makes me a really lucky filmmaker. And I did not do it by myself. I had anywhere between 25 and 35 people on our team, depending on which stage of the process you want to talk about,
Yeah.
doing it with me. I think that, and maybe this is a good transition into a little bit more of the entertainment side. But here's what I'll say: um, I would have loved to include a little bit more of the NBA's true POV on
Yeah.
what they want their involvement downstream to be. You
Mhm.
hear Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner.
Yeah.
You hear him, at All Star every year, give his sort of State of the Union, and he will talk a lot about, you know, the system at large. Um, I would love to be able to have included a little bit more of the, like, top level of the NBA's perspective on what they would
Mhm.
like, on what their dream scenario for the infrastructure to be. But what I'll say is, again, and there's no excuse me, there's no resentment around it. I totally understand that the position that they're in is this global entity, right? And so, like, it's hard for them to
Yeah.
participate in these conversations in an honest, meaningful way, and I do empathize with that. But that, I think, had a way of making me redouble my focus on where we could get rigorously honest testimony from.
Well, the other thing is you captured that period, like, you're right, the transformation of what the hell was going on in this space, and then at the tail end of it is, the NIL, which is like, wow, like, and by the way, you should probably start filming a new one now, because
Yeah.
in 10 years, I have no idea where this thing's going. It's the Wild West, and we're gonna have stories of what was really going on behind the scenes and the payoffs, and it's just gotta be so ugly, I think.
It again, I don't know where else to center this conversation other than in the need for films like ours,
Yeah,
because there is this just, like, runaway momentum
yeah.
of what I like to call money worship. Kind of going
And the
back to that.
money's so great, man. The money is so great.
Well,
Like, the college kids are already making millions of dollars at top guys. You're like, wow, like this thing just took off like a rocket.
so again, there's a five or six sort of core ideas in the spoils. One of them is, of course, that every level of the system has been professionalized, and that happened a long time ago, right? Like,
Yes.
when we were making
Yeah.
the film, like, one of the things that really distinguished us, like back in 2012 when we started, the conversation was still very much, should college athletes get paid? And even then,
Right.
my whole position was like, the professional party is
Yeah.
over long before these guys ever land on a college campus, right?
100%.
So
Well, dude, you saw it, like, in my opinion, watching basketball a long time, mid 90s to call it early 2000, probably that LeBron era. you had that, that kind of Iverson wave where like, dude, the kids were, great kids, but they just got like too much money too fast. They blow it. There was just too many horror stories. And then they really started to professionalize it. And dude, I mean, look, the proof is in the pudding. Guys like LeBron, KD, Tatum, these guys are pros. And by the way, like you saw them on draft night, talking smooth. They were very careful with their words, the way they conduct their business. I mean, these guys are corporations when you think about it, hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, LeBron's a billionaire. KD will end up being a billionaire. Like they knew from an early age, this is the way you do it. Don't do it like these other guys who, a lot of sad stories.
Yes. So, I think Ethan Strauss, who's I think the bet for my money, the best NBA journalist out there, partially because of his independence. I really encourage everyone to check out Ethan Strauss's writing on House of Strauss, but he's not in the sort of ESPN or
those buckets. Yeah,
so,
they're
so
mouthpieces for certain people.
Yeah, he's able to I would say just be more honest because he's not betrothed to some of these like broader corporate interests when it comes to what he has to say. So when he makes the point in our movie that the NBA can handle, and it's actually in their best interest for say LeBron, Steph, KD, the guys you're talking about, to understand and move as if they are businesses, right? The Jay-Z line, like, I'm not a businessman, I'm a business man, right? So the NBA can handle the top 5 or 10 or 15 of those guys regarding themselves that way.
Yeah.
Ethan's point that I agree with is I'm not sure the NBA can handle 50 guys seeing themselves that way, or 100 guys seeing themselves that way, or the entire league seeing themselves that way. And I want to go back to the idea about player produced and commercial propaganda for the league. We'll circle back, but when it comes to when it comes to like every player seeing themselves as a business, which is like for sure the case now, I would say, and Ethan makes this point too, you can see how that has manifested itself in the fan appetite for the NBA product. Like right now, for instance, is when, like, literally as we're recording this, we are in the peak season of interest in the NBA. Free agency, the draft, summer league, the transactional nature. So when I say the business has become the game, that is true not only for the players themselves at a very early age, but if you look at what the fans are interested in, the pods they listen to, what those pods are dissecting and unraveling, they're more interested in the business side of this as well, rather than the basketball, right? And I think that is at least partially informed by, what the NBA puts forward, right? If you look at the way the differences between how the NBA markets itself compared to say the NFL or baseball, right? 100%. The NFL is all about the shield, the team. Baseball is like America's pastime. Come out to the ballpark, have a hot dog, chill out, like just soak up the vibes,
Right.
The NBA figured out in the 80s with Magic and Bird, and then Jordan obviously took it to a different solar system, but like, we are gonna push the individual and the superstar and like that's spokesperson, so it's undeniably been great for the growth of the game, but obviously this is like, there's no endpoint to that. And I think that the NBA is flourishing by almost every metric, maybe except for the viewership on the actual product.
So guilty as charged. I mean, look, I love the NBA offseason and the podcast. When I listen to the most NBA related podcasts, it's trade deadline, free agency. Where's my player going? Where's it not going? Like, and I'm like, I'm caught up more in the drama. I think the beauty, I hate to say it, of LeBron and the Lakers is that they're just great information to talk about. Like on ESPN, they love talking about the Lakers because there's always a little
Cowboys,
drama. Who's
Lakers,
going to be the coach?
Yeah.
The Lakers, and they know how to muster up that media, the best of any two brands in sports. Maybe the NFL Cowboys are probably in that mix, but like they're great at it.
Yeah, I think that though, again, I don't want to totally ape everything Ethan says in the film, but I would say that when it comes to, let's say, the entire league in one way or another viewing themselves as these individual businesses, I think that the fans are picking up on that.
Agree with you. Agree with you.
And I say this, you know, I could never speak. And, you asked me about like what I would love, if I could give NBA execs, truth serum and sit them down. But like, I see what I see and I don't love. Tell me if you think I'm wrong here. I would say that the relationship between the fans and the players has never been more antagonistic.
100%. Well,
I
so it makes you wonder. Look, they just signed a $76 billion TV deal. They crushed it. Okay.
Oh yeah.
And now it is funny that a couple teams at their peak have been up for sale. So the Celtics are up for sale. Cuban sold a big piece of his team. Like, these are smart people. Why are they now? It may be top of the market. I don't know, but it makes you wonder. Like, you've got this asset that it's just like it's shot up like a rocket stick. I mean, like the Celtics were bought, I think, in 2003 for 360 million. They're worth 5-6 billion right now. Like, should you hold on to it, or maybe they're seeing something in the data that says, "Hey, wait a minute, I don't know."
So, yeah, I mean, zooming out, like, look, I am a filmmaker, right? So I don't work for Forbes or the Wall Street Journal or like, I
Yeah,
don't have, but I'll say that just because something has worked to get you to this point doesn't mean it's the best
yeah, man.
strategy to ride into the rocks, you know?
Yeah,
And I think that, maybe this is a reach, maybe it's not. If you look at, say, the political world or the news media, I think that what
yeah,
you're seeing is audiences gravitating towards at least what they regard to be more substantive, honest content, even as much as I
yeah,
hate that word, right? But
yeah,
there's
yeah,
a
yeah. Mass
reason why,
mass
like,
media is dying a slow death. Like the newspaper, if you look at the numbers for CNN, MSNBC, Fox, they're all going down. And independent journalism, whether it's Substack, podcast, whatever, are shooting up. So it tells you something.
which is why I think that, from a fan interest standpoint, obviously the money is there, right? And I think that you can the money is there and it's great, and it's also, I would say, at the root of some of their core problems.
100%.
Because you look at the
100%.
money, and again, I look at this. I'm, as a filmmaker, as a director, I am primarily interested, and I think that's what separates me and my point of view from a lot of other stuff. I'm interested in like root causes and conditions. I'm interested in like system dynamics, like, and you look at the money avalanche that has befallen in great and also other ways that now, like, look at it, Dan. Gambling money now completely bankrolls the entire media apparatus around it, right? It's
Yeah,
FanDuel, it's
yeah,
DraftKings,
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
all this stuff, right? So gambling money is now propping up almost even ESPN Bet now. Like ESPN's giving out
Correct.
picks at halftime, right? Like
They have
live money
shows.
lines. So the gambling money now props up the media. You look at the millions, if not billions, of dollars that are now infiltrating college and amateur grassroots sports.
Mhm.
That's why I think the third act of our film is so relevant, because no one is talking about what's in the best interest of these players and families
Right.
and what's in the best interest of the soul of the game.
Yeah.
Because
That's the bigger picture, in my opinion. Yeah.
and when in the NBA, I know that they have like evolved and grown to the point where they are now indisputably, obviously, an entertainment product.
Yes.
But their product remains, I think, the most dynamic, compelling, beautiful team game on the planet.
Mhm.
And the health of that thing, that core thing that is your core business,
Yeah.
has to matter at some point on the time scale. And I'm 38, but I, I would, again, I'm not a like a business insider, but you look at the metrics of the TikTok generation, or these 15 to 25-year-olds that
Yeah, man.
aren't watching games, that are really only interested in the reality show
Yeah.
of the world. All I can say is that if I was Adam, I would be thinking about that. And I'm not here to say that he's not. Um,
Yeah. He could
but
be. They could be in for a rude awakening one day. I'm a hardcore sports fan, so among the many reasons I love your film. But dude, I start to think I don't watch as much NBA as I used to. Now I watch a lot of the highlights and that kind of stuff, but like sit through a actual game, not even a fraction of what I used to.
I adore this game. I love this game. It has been one of my life's greatest teachers. Like, you are not
Yeah,
going to
sure, it's
find a
great.
bigger basketball freak than me, obviously, from the
Mm.
films I've made. But I grew up falling in love with the game as a player and as a fan. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
some of my most formative like my entire childhood was watching the Bulls and then Kobe and Shaq with my dad. And when I say watching the
yeah.
Bulls and Kobe and Shaq, I mean every night. Like all
Every night
82,
and
all
NBC. Remember
82
NBC basketball? Yeah, you used to
all
watch
82
Saturdays.
games of the
Yeah, man.
Lakers, like, and like the games,
The game. Yeah, 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 yeah.
the games. And like, that's sometimes when I feel like I sound like a crazy person sometimes, but when I'm like suggesting the game is the main thing.
Yeah, and you
That's
don't.
the ultimate sort of like plea for everyone, for
Yeah,
players as they come, like, keep the game the main thing.
totally. Well, one
So
of the things that comes out in your movie is that you can tell whoever made this movie is a basketball fan, right? There's a lot of love, and this
love
wasn't
is
made
the
by
word I
some
would
corporate
use.
guy, right? You know that this guy was a basketball junkie at some point. That's why one of the first when I met you was first I was like, you got to be a basketball junkie or used to play because it comes out in the movie.
Well, you talk about what sustained me over an 11-year period of time. Um, it was the need to make this movie. Like, I
Yeah,
love this game. I grew up in this system.
yeah,
And it's because of that that I understand that, from my point of view, the incentives have to change.
yeah. They got a line, right?
And if and again, there's never been a film like ours. If there has been, I would love for somebody to call it to my attention, because trust me, I would have loved for them to have been other films like ours for me to reference, for me to like study and like what worked, what didn't.
Yeah.
There aren't. And that's why the biggest inspirations tonally and structurally for the spoils were like films like Michael Clayton,
Hmm.
which is like a
Yeah,
corporate espionage thriller,
yeah.
or The Wire, which is a system portrait, right? The
The
Wire
best.
is, right. So like, I always talk about our film sort of being a love child between Hoop Dreams, Michael Clayton, and The Wire, because it is that top down, bottom up system portrait. This is why all the pieces matter,
Yeah.
and really in search of the truth. And I don't think that any meaningful change can happen on any level without an honest
Yeah.
inventory of where we're at. And so that's where I think, I've been so thrilled with the reception to the film. One of my favorite reviews basically said, this film does as brilliant a job as anything ever has, talking about how we got from A to B,
Yeah.
and poses really important questions about how we get from B to C, and what C looks like. Because if it's just going to be this money avalanche, okay, but
Yeah, the game's gonna get sideways. It's pretty amazing. You brought up a good point, and then I got one more question. Then we're gonna do some rapid fire. But
sure,
you're right. One of the things I love about your movie is you can tell it's not some corporate jargon. And what I mean by that is I love sports docs. When 30 for 30 came out, I thought it was awesome. And then all of a sudden, all these guys protecting their brand. The minute I see a sports doc, but it says co-executive produced by the player that they're gonna
it's a
feature, I'm
commercial.
out
It's
because
a
it's a big
commercial.
commercial. It's not the real story. It's a soft piece. I'm like, I'm out. And that's why I like your doc because it's raw, it's real, I'm going to get to behind the scenes look at what is this industry that I don't know a lot about and has a lot of gray areas and is really evolving. And we're going to take a peek behind the curtain and what's going on.
We're going to peel the curtain back. I so appreciate you saying that, and it's really the highest compliment you could pay me, so thank you. But like, yes, and this is a great way to wrap up the point we were making before, but I don't actually think, again, going back to why our film is so unique, I don't think there's never been a film like ours, but I don't think another one could ever be made again, for the reason you're talking about. Like, I will forever be thankful to Atope and the Compton Magic for the access they gave me. But part of the reason I actually, you asked me what I wished I could have gotten more of, which is like that, like really Madison Avenue corporate NBA perspective, honestly.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't think that exists.
No,
It
of course not.
no, no, and not that their point of view doesn't exist, but the sort of like the vulnerable,
Yeah,
confessional nature of it. I don't
yeah.
think that access exists. And so I think that ultimately that's why I was so actually like heartened to focus on it from the ground up versus the top down, because
Yeah.
the incentives do flow up. They do trickle up. And so I think that actually does ironically make our film the most honest and piercing look at the system writ large.
Mhm.
Because I would never speak for Atope or people like him in his system, but had I met Atope today versus in 2012,
Oh,
I don't think he would have. The 2024 version of Atope is a different version of him that would have been much more conscious around.
100%.
You know what I'm saying? So
He wouldn't
like
have been as
that.
raw and open.
That's the
No
thing.
way.
That's one of the reasons why the film is so great, is because you can feel not only the filmmaker's search for honesty, but the lack of any filter from anyone that's featured, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that was my guiding light. Like, I'm here to tell the truth. I'm here to unravel how this really works. And I'm just so thankful to everyone in the film for showing up for that purpose. So I really again encourage everyone to check it out.
Yeah.
For
So
me, it's a dream come
it's
true.
fantastic. So real quick, just because I don't understand the business of documentarians and stuff, you went direct through a platform. Walk me through
Yeah.
that business case. Like, how does that happen versus going to, an Amazon Direct or obviously eventually some other platform like HBO or something like that? How does that
It
work?
Well, I mean, it starts from a few things. Number one, I know what that route looks like. Netflix
Yeah.
acquired my first film back in
Yeah.
2017. I know what it means to sign an overall deal with them, on the
Yeah.
good and bad side, right? On the plus
Sure.
side, it was my first film, so it's nice to walk into a room and say I just made a film, and people say where can I watch it, and then you say it's on Netflix, and then instantly they think you're the man, and that's all great and cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, However, not only has a lot changed in the distribution landscape since then, but they don't promote it, so the promotion of it falls to us anyway.
Mhm.
It's just a tile up there on the screen, and ultimately, I'm a big proponent of the idea that, on a filmmaking standpoint, on an from a broader art standpoint, if you don't treat your thing like it's special, nobody
Yeah.
will. Nobody will.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
And we really felt, and I was persuaded to go a more sort of new wave route for a few reasons. Number one, maintaining ownership over my catalog, my work is paramount. Number two, the ability to connect directly with our audience and provide direct value is something
Yes.
that I felt like was more in our capability range than like just the overall, because that's going back again to like the commercials that now exist for in documentary form. It's all disposable. And
Yeah,
like
man.
I wanted to really build a life for our film that is integrating it into the culture, into the community where it can provide the most value. And
Mhm.
so, I've just been the freedom and the nimbleness and the flexibility we have in this route. Jolt.film they're a great partner for us, and to my knowledge, the only streaming platform out there that shares the audience data with their filmmakers, which is so
That's gold.
important and such a
Yeah.
differentiator. It's a big reason the strikes happen, because Netflix and Amazon and these big streamers understand that they draw a red line around, like, even Spielberg, the biggest Scorsese, like, they're not giving him data on who's watching his stuff, how they're watching it. Like, that stuff
Yeah.
they understand it's priceless, it's gold. And my manager told me a year and a half ago, Mike, if you want to still be doing this in 15 years, you have to have a direct connection with your audience and be able to
Yeah.
talk to
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
reach out, touch them, understand who they are. And so when I made my first film, like, yeah, it was all over the world, but like, I have no idea who's actually consuming it.
Right.
And like, that infrastructure for me as a filmmaker is not going to build itself. And you add all of that up, and then you know look at it, and it's like, if I'm going to optimize for impact, we can directly connect with our audience in really meaningful ways. And I've just been blown away. I mean, like, on the day the film came out, like, Ken Burns had seen an advanced
Which is so
copy. I mean,
cool.
Ken Burns is the greatest to ever do what I do. So for him
The
to
best.
see and acknowledge and endorse our film, like, the reception has just been so awesome. And like, the film is going to have a big, long life. And I think that's partially because we're treating it like it's special, because it is. So
It's very special, and I know a lot of our listeners are going to listen to it after. Trust me, it is the easiest thing to go. You go online, You click a couple buttons, and the quality's fantastic. Okay, I can't let you go without some rapid fire questions. You
Let's do
ready?
it. Let's do it.
All right. High school. When they were in high school, what is your Mount Rushmore of high school players?
Wow. Mount Rushmore of high school players. Well, I'm gonna go Kobe for obvious reasons. And
Mhm.
he's also a very interesting person to highlight just because he didn't really spend a ton of time in the American AAU system. But
Correct.
nevertheless,
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, good point.
I think I would also, having grown up in LA at the time when he was in high school, Baron Davis was always a hero of mine.
Stud. Total stud.
I remember he walked into a gym I was playing in at AAU in, and I'll just never forget him sitting down to like watch our game.
Oh,
Because I just had Baron was the man in LA growing up. Um, I'd probably go Tracy McGrady up there,
okay.
big time.
Stud. Right out of
And
high school,
then
got drafted.
yeah, and then I mean I know I'm hitting on the heavy hitters here, but like LeBron and I are the same year, so I mean, and for
You're in
LeBron, I mean
LeBron's
I could
class.
go into more niche areas, but I think
No, that's a great
LeBron,
list, man. That's a
yeah,
great list.
LeBron, Kobe, Baron Davis, and T Mac to me. I mean it's yeah.
Okay, you can't say yours, but your favorite basketball movie of all time.
Blue Chips.
Blue Chips is a very underrated one. I would tell you underrated. I
And ahead
rewatched
of
it a
its
couple
time.
years ago. It's really good. Way ahead of its time. Way ahead of its time. And Nick Nolte as the angry old coach. It was great. All right. You get the pick. You can dunk on your best friend or hit a game-winning three-pointer against one of your enemies, your biggest rivals. What would you pick?
Oh, the latter, and on the road too. I want Game
On the
7 on the
road, right
road
in the heart.
and step back in his eyeball. That's yeah.
All right. Favorite Ken Burns documentary.
I'll go with his first. I'll go with Brooklyn Bridge. Um, I think you talk about the impact that Ken has had on the art form. I can really see him experimenting and firming up a style that would revolutionize our genre. And I think that the ingenuity and the willingness to try new shit. So like I have obviously immense respect for him. Civil War, it's like,
Oh, he's fantastic.
but I would go to his first. I like to really look at a filmmaker in their formative years. And so for me, Brooklyn Bridge is up there.
Oh, yeah, dude. I watch pretty much all his stuff. Um, Piece of advice you'd give to a young filmmaker.
Two things. Number one, I get asked this question all the time. If there's anything else you could see yourself being happy doing, go do that.
That's a great answer.
You are going to get told no a million times. And if your ego or sense of self can't handle that level of rejection, this business will paint you into a corner where you'll be like, yeah, maybe I should go be a dentist.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the second piece is going to be what will sustain you through that is have something to say. I see so many people come into this business because they want to be seen as a producer or be seen as a filmmaker. But if you don't have something to say, what are you doing here? So
Yeah.
get really honest with what your point of view is, what your perspective is. And the more you can simplify that, I always like to say one of the best things I learned at USC Film School was making something complicated is easy.
Mhm.
Making something simple is hard. So
That's great advice.
yeah, I would
Great advice.
say the more you can distill and essentialize your point of view and what you're here to say, that's going to sustain you through all the no's, all the rejection. And when you are able to migrate that vision from your soul onto the screen, um, it will just be that much more fulfilling.
Good stuff. All right. I appoint you AAU czar, and you
Yeah.
can only change one thing. One thing. What's the one thing you're going to change?
Well, AAU czar or American basketball system czar?
The czar of all czars when it comes
The
to
czar of
amateur
all czars.
basketball.
I would love to see. I'd love to see two things. I'd love to see USA basketball exert a greater leadership role in this world. Um,
Okay.
I think that when you look at the entities who are possible candidates for helping reshape the system and its continuity, and giving it a firmer structure. I think USA Basketball is probably in the firmest or in the best position to do that. I don't know what their appetite for doing that is. But yeah, so that would be one. And then I think, again, going back to the NBA, you look at the way other countries do basketball and their developmental systems. Pro teams have a much more robust developmental system. Like Real Madrid, for instance, has a junior, so I don't, again, it kind of will come down to what the NBA, what their appetite would be for, like the Lakers having a, I don't want to say JV team, but like I do think
Minor
that
league system like baseball.
Yeah, I think that, I got nothing against players and families choosing to be like, all right, I'm 12, I'm gonna chase this. It is gonna be my North Star. But let's put a more more intentional system around that, so that they're not just floating through this matrix of bullshit.
Yeah.
Right. If that's what you're going to identify, cool, go chase it, but right now they're just like left to kind of improv it. And I don't think it's in their best interest. And I think if we had a system that was more European, I guess might not be the right word, but I think those two things. Yeah.
All right. Settle this once and for all. It's catnip for ESPN, but who's the GOAT, MJ or LeBron?
Kobe's my GOAT.
Here we go.
Kobe's my GOAT, but if
Looking
you're
like a true Laker fan.
No, I think Kobe Bryant. I think somewhere in that 2006 to 2009 version of Kobe, right? If you talk about him like wine vintages,
Yeah.
I think the better question is, what's the best version? What's the best vintage of Jordan? What's the best vintage of LeBron? What's the best vintage of Kobe? And then let's compare those basketball players at a moment in time. I think that 08-09 Kobe is the sort of best combination of everything that makes a great basketball player personally. But if it's Jordan or LeBron, what are we talking about? It's Michael Jordan. Come on.
There you go. Mamba mentality, brother. Where can people find out about the movie?
It's real simple. Thespoilsmovie.com has everything you need right there. You could also go to jolt.film, but for simplicity's sake, thespoilsmovie.com.
Viewers, I watched it. If you love hoops, you love a good story, it's awesome. Sign up on the website. It is super easy to do. The quality, the love, the passion. This guy spent 11 years going behind the scenes into a world that a lot of us don't know about. I highly recommend it. Check it out. My man, thank you so much for being on the show. If you're in Miami, look me up. Would love to take you to a basketball game.
Dan, thank you for having me on, man. I'm going to take you up on that next time I'm in Miami.
Anytime, man. I got heat tickets. Let's do it.
All right, brother. I appreciate you.
All right,
Thanks for the time.
Take care.